50 men. All of them armed. All of them here for me. The words tore out of Nora Hartley before she could stop them, a whisper so thin it barely survived the hallway air. 6:47 in the morning. The stairwell of the riverside apartment smelled like gun oil and expensive cologne, a combination that did not belong in a building where the walls sweated mold and the heat cut off every November 1st. The boots came first. Thunder on concrete stairs. One step, then another, then a rhythm that was not a rhythm but a machine, synchronous and purposeful and absolutely terrifying. 50 men in black tactical gear filled the stairwell like water, finding every crack, every corner, every space where a person might hide. Their jackets bore no insignia. No badge. No name. Just the precise geometry of people who had trained together for years to move like a single organism with 50 limbs. Emma pressed against her mother's back. 6-year-old Marcus gripped the fabric of her shirt so hard his small knuckles went white. Both children held their breath. Children understood danger in ways that did not require explanation. They smelled it. They felt it vibrating through the air like a tuning fork struck in darkness. And then the boots stopped. The silence that followed was worse than the sound had been. A silence thick enough to drown in. The hallway was so quiet you could hear the fluorescent light fixture humming above apartment for C, that dying electronic buzz that had been growing louder every morning for 3 months until it became the soundtrack of her eviction notice. Luca Calabrese stepped forward. He was 38 years old but carried himself like a man who had been old since childhood. 6'3". Broad shoulders wrapped in a tailored suit that cost more than everything she owned, everything in her apartment, everything she would ever own if she worked until her joints failed and her hands turned to bone. The suit was charcoal gray. The shirt beneath was white silk, open at the throat, showing the beginnings of a chest that had been carved from stone and violence. His hair was dark, almost black, silvered only at the temples in a way that made him look distinguished rather than aging. But it was his scar that stopped the breath in her lungs. It ran from the outer corner of his left eye down to his cheekbone like a blade had once tried to separate his face from his skull and nearly succeeded. His eyes were storm gray. Not metaphorically. They were the actual color of sky before a hurricane makes landfall. When he looked at her, Nora felt something crack open inside her chest. "Miss Hartley," he said. His voice was deep and solid like an oath spoken in a cathedral. 3 days ago you stepped between me and a bullet. Today I settle my debts. She could not speak. Her throat had closed. The $34 in her pocket suddenly felt like the heaviest weight in the universe, pulling her down through the floor, through the foundation, into the earth itself. There was also a foreclosure notice on her kitchen table. $125,000. 7 days until the landlord changed the locks. 7 days until her children slept in her car. But what she did not know was that these 50 men had not come to threaten her life. They had come to dismantle the empire of corruption that had nearly cost her everything. They had come to tear Douglas Hale and Margaret Harrington into pieces so small that even God would struggle to recognize the shapes. She did not know that her name would be the reason an entire criminal organization pivoted toward justice. Marcus's hand trembled against her spine. Emma made a small sound, not quite a cry, not quite a breath. "We are not here to frighten your children," Luca said. He turned to Bruno, the taller of his 2 lieutenants, a man with a scar across his throat like he had survived something that should have killed him. "Bruno, tell the men to lower their presence." The tactical gear retreated. Not leaving. Retreating. Moving down the stairs with precision, establishing a perimeter in the hallway below, at the landing, in the stairwell, creating a fortress of flesh and weapons around apartment for C. But their hands came away from their chests. Their postures loosened slightly. The absolute military precision became something fractionally less apocalyptic. Still terrifying. Still impossible. Still the sight of an apocalypse dressed in black fabric and leather. "I have something for you," Luca said. He held up a manila folder. His hands were large, calloused on the knuckles, with a gold watch on one wrist and a silver ring on his thumb. A man's hands. A powerful man's hands. Inside this folder is a document from the San Francisco Municipal Assessor's Office. It concerns the foreclosure notice currently on your kitchen table. How did he know about the foreclosure notice? How did he know anything about her at all? The debt against your home has been paid, he continued. His voice did not change inflection. He spoke about erasing $125,000 the way another man might discuss the weather. The paperwork is complete. The property is now entirely yours. No lender. No landlord. No debt. The keys remain with you. The floor was shifting. The walls were breathing. Nora's vision narrowed to a tunnel that pointed only at Luca Calabrese and the manila folder he was extending toward her. "Why?" she whispered. "Because you stepped between me and a bullet," he said. "Because you chose to shield a stranger. Because in doing so you reminded me that mercy and strength are not opposites. In my world, Miss Hartley, that debt is unpayable in ordinary currency. You saved my life. This is the only gesture I could make that approaches even a fraction of that value." 3 days earlier, none of this had been predictable. 3 days earlier, Nora Hartley had been a single mother with 2 children and a job that was slowly destroying her. She had been working the night shift at the Golden Cardinal restaurant, a high-end establishment where the wealthy came to spend money the way others spent air. She had been invisible to them, as invisible as the steam rising from their espresso cups, as invisible as the hands that cleared their plates. 3 days earlier, she had $34 in her pocket and a foreclosure notice on her kitchen table and no reasonable hope that either of those facts would ever change. 3 days earlier, a thunderstorm was beginning to gather over San Francisco like the sky itself was preparing to weep. Before we continue, drop a like if this story hits you. Share it with someone who needs to hear it and subscribe so you do not miss what is coming tomorrow. Now let us go back to the beginning. Let us return to the moment when a summer thunderstorm changed everything. 72 hours earlier. The evening that would chain a single mother and a mafia boss together in ways neither could escape. The night had started like every other night. The Golden Cardinal was crowded with people whose business cards cost more than her monthly rent. Men in suits that did not wrinkle. Women in dresses that caught the light like captured stars. They ordered wine by vintage number. They discussed investments and mergers and the price of power as though it was a thing that could be quantified. Nora moved between tables with a tray held at her shoulder, her feet screaming inside shoes that had developed holes 6 months ago and that she stuffed with newspaper each morning because she could not afford to replace them. Her uniform was black, which hid the stains from the morning shift when she cleaned offices downtown, but it could not hide the tremor in her hands or the way her eyes had stopped focusing properly around 3 in the afternoon. Emma was with a babysitter, a woman in the building who watched her for $20 a night. Marcus was asleep in their apartment, a space so small you could stand in the middle and touch all 4 walls if you stretched. The foreclosure notice was waiting on the kitchen table like an animal that had eaten and was no longer hungry but content simply to remain present, reminding her of its appetite. At table 7, a man named Douglas Hale was celebrating. He was 52 years old but dressed himself like someone trying to convince the world he was 30. His shirt was unbuttoned too far. His cologne was aggressive. He had been the manager at the Golden Cardinal for 4 years, and in that time he had made it his personal mission to make Nora's life smaller and more impossible. "Nora," he called as she passed. His voice was honey over gravel. "Come here for a moment." She came. You did not ignore the manager. The manager was the difference between keeping this job and losing it, between $34 and $0, between a roof and the sky. "I need you to pour the wine for table 4, he said. His hand reached out and adjusted her sleeve, moving it up her arm with a familiarity that made her skin retreat. "Personal attention. They are very important clients of mine. Do you understand what personal attention means?" She understood. Everyone understood. Personal attention was the thing he had demanded 3 weeks ago in the storage room when he locked the door and told her that if she did not cooperate, he would tell the owner that she had been stealing from the till. She had not stolen anything. The owner would have believed her. But she could not risk it. She could not risk her job. She had 2 children who needed to eat. "I understand," she said. The storm began at 7:45 in the evening. The sky went from twilight grey to the color of a bruise, and the rain came down like the atmosphere itself was collapsing. The Golden Cardinal's windows became vertical rivers. The expensive people inside did not care. They had paid for the experience of watching the world flood from the safety of a leather booth. At 8:33, a convoy of black SUVs pulled up outside the restaurant. The rain was coming down so hard that it was difficult to see the vehicles clearly, but Nora felt them before she saw them. A change in the air. An electrical charge. The kitchen staff looked up from their stations. The servers exchanged a glance that said danger without using words. The door opened. Luca Calabrese stepped in from the thunderstorm like the sky had ejected him from its mouth. Water poured from his shoulders. His suit was soaked. His hair was plastered against his skull. Behind him came Bruno and Pietro, both equally drenched, both scanning the restaurant with eyes that catalogued exits and threats and distances. He walked to table 7. Douglas Hale's face went white. "Luca," Douglas said. The word came out as a whisper. "I did not know you were coming." "I did not know." "You did not know many things," Luca said. His voice was steady. His voice was a blade wrapped in ice. "But you will learn them now." One of Hale's clients stood. A large man with shoulders like a linebacker. Before he could move, Bruno crossed the distance between them with a speed that seemed to bend the air. No violence. Not yet. Just a presence that communicated that movement would result in consequences. Nora stood frozen with her wine bottle still raised. The liquid inside trembled in response to her trembling. Around her, the restaurant had gone absolutely silent. The expensive people understood that they were witnessing something that was not meant for their eyes. They were watching a world collide with another world, the one they lived in intersecting briefly with something darker and more real. Then the shooting started. The first shot came from outside the restaurant. A sound like the world cracking. The window nearest Luca exploded inward, becoming a shower of diamonds made of glass and light. His men reacted instantly, moving toward him, creating a human shield. But Nora moved faster. She stepped between Luca and the window. She stepped directly into the path of the second bullet. It caught her left shoulder, spinning her backward, and she understood for one moment, one crystal clear moment, that she had just died, that this was what dying felt like, this burning, this shock, this betrayal of her own body. Then Luca caught her before she fell. His arms wrapped around her, and he pulled her to the floor behind the shelter of a marble column just as the window erupted a second time. The third bullet passed through the space where her chest had been moments before. "Stay down," he commanded, and his voice was thunder, was lightning, was the sound of the sky splitting open. She stayed down. She was bleeding. Her shoulder was on fire. But she stayed down because his order was not a request. It was the sound of absolute authority spoken in the language of consequence. The shooting stopped. The rain continued, that endless thunderstorm that would erase the evidence of everything that happened tonight. Through the pain, through the shock, Nora understood something. She had just stepped between death and a powerful man. She had chosen to shield him. She did not know that in 3 days, 50 men would arrive at her apartment building. She did not know that her life had fundamentally changed in the instant she decided that someone else's survival was worth more than her own. She only knew that she was bleeding, and Luca Calabrese was holding her in his arms like she was something precious, something worth protecting, something that could never be invisible again. 72 hours. That is how long Nora Hartley had before the 50 men would arrive at her apartment building. 72 hours before everything changed. But she did not know that yet. She only knew that it was 11:43 at night on a Wednesday in August, and the thunderstorm was trying to kill her. The rain came down like a punishment, like the sky itself was angry at her for still being alive, for still trying. Lightning cracked across the darkness in jagged white lines, turning the world purple for just a moment, and the semi-trucks on Highway 101 sprayed water across her windshield so thick that the wipers could not keep up. Nora gripped the steering wheel of her 15-year-old Honda with both hands, her knuckles white, her jaw clenched so tight her teeth ached. The engine would not turn over. It had made a grinding sound 3 miles back, a sound like metal screaming, and then nothing. Just silence and the rain and the knowledge that she was stuck. In the back seat, Emma lay curled on her side, her 10-year-old body fevered and small under a blanket that had been her mother's in high school. The fever had started that morning, 103 degrees, hot enough to terrify Nora, not hot enough to warrant the emergency room that they could not afford. She had spent the grocery money on antibiotics instead. $34 left. That was all that remained between her and complete emptiness. $34, and 7 days until the foreclosure notice on her kitchen table became a legal reality. $125,000. A number so large it stopped meaning anything. It was like trying to imagine the distance to the sun. The figure was too enormous to carry in her mind. Nora pulled the crumpled bills from her jacket pocket and smoothed them on the steering wheel, counting by the dome light. 1, 2, 5, 10, 20, 34. She spoke the number aloud because saying it made it real, made it something she could face. $34. $34. She had counted them 3 times already that day. Muscle memory. Terror memory. The counting that sick people do when they are drowning. Her son, Marcus, was 3 miles back at the community shelter with their last grocery bag. The shelter had a roof and a light and a volunteer named Mrs. Chen who gave him hot cocoa and did not ask questions. Nora's Honda could not fit all of them and the groceries and anything else they might need. So she had driven Emma here first, then abandoned the car to walk Marcus back in the rain, then walk back to the car alone, because some choices are not choices. They are just what happens when you have nothing left to refuse. She pulled the grandmother's recipe book from beneath the passenger seat. It was the only thing in her possession that had genuine value, though not the kind anyone could sell. The leather cover was cracked and soft from decades of handling. The pages were yellowed, stained with butter and flour and splashes of tomato sauce. In the margins, her grandmother had written notes in pencil. Her name was Rosa, and she had come from Naples with nothing and had learned to feed people, to make something beautiful from poverty. On the inside cover, a single sentence in her careful handwriting: food is love. Feed people you love. Nora pressed the book against her chest and closed her eyes. That was when the headlights appeared. 5 black SUVs emerged from the rain like sharks, water spraying from beneath their wheels, their lights cutting through the darkness with surgical precision. They pulled up behind her Honda in a formation so deliberate, so organized, that Nora's instinct screamed danger. Men in suits began stepping out of the vehicles, each one holding an umbrella as if the rain mattered, as if they were here for civilized reasons. As if anyone civilized drove 5 identical black SUVs on a highway at midnight. Nora's hands trembled as she gripped the recipe book tighter. The rear door of the center SUV opened, and he stepped out into the storm. Luca Calabrese was 6'3", and the rain seemed to recognize his presence and fall harder around him, as if even the weather deferred to his authority. His dark hair, thick and precisely cut, soaked instantly to his skull. He wore a charcoal suit that probably cost more than Nora made in 6 months, and the rain beaded on the fabric without penetrating it, designer, waterproofed, expensive beyond reason. His white shirt was open at the collar, revealing the broad chest of a man who had once fought with his hands before he had learned to fight with words and the weight of his empire. A thin silver scar ran from his right eye to his cheekbone, and it caught the lightning for just a moment, glowing like a brand. His eyes were storm gray, the color of the sky before a tornado, and they moved across the highway with the calculation of a man surveying a battlefield. Those eyes found her Honda. They found her small shape in the driver's seat, clutching a book to her chest. The man closest to her, broad-shouldered and heavy-jawed, approached her window with careful steps. He wore an earpiece, black and discreet. When he leaned down, his voice was rough, edged with the accent of someone's grandparents' country. "You need assistance." Nora's throat had closed. She could barely push the words out. I just need a jump. My daughter is sick. I just need. Her voice broke like old wood. Emma coughed in the back seat. A wet, rattling sound that belonged in a hospital, not a car on a highway during a thunderstorm. The man straightened, and she could hear him speak into his earpiece. Boss, the alternator is dead. This car is not starting tonight. She watched Luca Calabrese through the rain-streaked glass. He stood completely still, his face reflecting nothing. His men formed a protective perimeter around him, as if he were a man accustomed to threats, as if danger was something he expected the way other people expected sunrise. Then he turned and looked directly at her window. In that moment, Nora understood that this man saw her. Not the way people usually saw her, as a waitress in a black uniform, as a voice taking orders, as something transparent and temporary. He saw her the way a general sees a soldier holding the line, as someone already at war, already bleeding, already aware that the next moment might be the last one. He said something to the man beside him, words too low for her to hear over the storm. The man came back to her window. Open the door. I'm fine, Nora said, but her voice was a whisper. I'm fine. I can call a tow truck. The man said, and his voice held no cruelty, only the kind of certainty that did not require agreement. Open the door. She opened the door. My name is Bruno. This is my boss, Luca Calabrese. You are going to get in our vehicle with your daughter. We will take you where you need to go. Nora said no. She said no 3 times, because accepting help from men like this was how people disappeared. It was how they became debts that could never be repaid, how they entered a world with its own currency and its own rules, and she knew enough about the margins of the city to understand that the price of kindness from powerful men was usually your soul. But Emma coughed again. That wet, helpless sound. Okay, Nora said. Okay. But I need to pick up my son first. He's at the shelter. 3 miles east. Then we pick up your son, Bruno said. He helped her out of the car, actually helped her, his large hand beneath her elbow, supporting her weight as her legs nearly buckled. She grabbed the recipe book. She would not leave it. She would leave everything else, but not that. Bruno did not comment on it. He simply guided her to the rear door of the center SUV, where Luca Calabrese sat waiting, and helped her inside. The SUV was warm. Leather seats, dark and luxurious. The air conditioning dried the rain from her skin immediately. Emma was placed on the seat beside her, and someone, Bruno, draped a blanket over her, a real blanket, cashmere and warm. Nobody spoke. The men in suits occupied the other vehicle. Luca sat across from Nora and Emma, separated from them by the pristine interior of a car that probably cost more than her entire life. Rain drummed on the roof. Lightning flashed through the tinted windows. The driver, a young man with careful eyes, pulled back onto the highway and drove toward the shelter where Marcus was waiting. Luca did not speak. He simply watched her. Not in a way that felt threatening, in a way that felt like seeing. Like recognition. What is your name? He asked. His voice was deep and solid like an oath, like the kind of voice that gave orders and expected them to be followed. Nora, she said. Nora Hartley. And your children? Emma. She's 10. Marcus is 6. He nodded slowly, and that grey gaze moved to the recipe book clutched in her hands. That is important to you. It was not a question. My grandmother's, Nora said. She made food. She made beautiful food from nothing. She could not finish the sentence. I have not made anything beautiful in a very long time. The SUV pulled into the community shelter parking lot. Marcus stood under the awning with Mrs. Chen, their last grocery bag at his feet, and when he saw the 5 black SUVs pull up, his small face registered pure terror. Nora opened the door and called to him, and he ran through the rain without hesitation. Bruno helped him inside. Marcus was soaked, shivering, clutching the grocery bag like it was the only thing keeping him anchored to the earth. He climbed into the seat beside Nora and immediately reached for his sister, his small hand checking that Emma was still warm, still breathing, still alive. Luca watched this with an expression that revealed nothing. The drive to her apartment took 23 minutes. During that drive, Luca Calabrese did not speak to her. He simply sat across from them, occasionally checking his phone, occasionally listening to messages through his earpiece, occasionally closing his eyes as if the weight of his empire was a physical thing that exhausted him. But his eyes always opened when one of her children made a sound. Always came back to them. When they arrived at her building, a 4-story structure with peeling blue paint and a security door that had been broken since spring, Bruno opened the door and helped them out. Nora gathered Emma, and Marcus took her hand, and they stood in the rain for just a moment, facing the stairs that led to the 3rd-floor apartment where they lived. "Thank you," Nora said. "Thank you for helping us." Luca stepped out of the SUV. The rain began to fall harder, as if the sky was renewing its assault, but he did not pull an umbrella. He simply looked at her, really looked at her, and in his storm-grey eyes she saw something that surprised her. Exhaustion, yes. Loneliness, maybe. But also something that looked almost like envy. Like he was envying her the weight of her children's hands in hers. "Go," he said. "Take care of them." She took her children upstairs. She did not look back. In the SUV, as they pulled away from her building, Bruno turned to his boss. "Boss?" Luca was still looking out the rear window, at the peeling blue paint and the broken door and the 3 people disappearing into poverty like stones sinking in water. "Find out everything about her," Luca said. His voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of absolute command. Her name. Her work. Her life. All of it. And find out why. "Why, boss?" "Because," Luca said, and he turned away from the window, "a woman like that does not exist without a story. And I want to know what made her." What Nora did not know as she carried Emma up the stairs and Marcus clutched her jacket was that she had just been marked. Not by destiny. Not by fate. But by the attention of a man who built his empire on understanding exactly what happened when people had nothing left to lose, and she had just shown him that she was willing to give away the last thing she possessed, pride, safety, invisibility, for the sake of her children. In 6 hours, she would step between him and a bullet. But that storm had not finished yet. She knew the bullet was coming before her mind understood what her body already knew. The alley behind Harrington's restaurant stretched narrow and suffocating, brick walls close enough to touch on both sides, the summer heat pressing down like a hand against her chest. Nora Hartley stood with her back against the wall, her white uniform stained with wine and exhaustion, counting $17 in crumpled bills when the black SUVs pulled around the corner like a curse made solid. 4 doors opened in sequence. Men in tailored suits emerged, moving with the kind of purpose that made the air itself go still. Then he stepped out, the man from the storm 3 nights ago, the one she recognized from the rain and her daughter's fever and the moment when her life had become something other than what it was before. Luca Calabrese, tall and broad-shouldered, his dark hair swept back from a face carved from granite, wore an open-collared white shirt beneath a suit that cost more than everything she owned combined. A scar ran from the corner of his left eye to his cheekbone, silver against olive skin. He moved like a general surveying a battlefield, each step deliberate, controlled, the kind of movement that came from a lifetime of being obeyed without question. His storm-grey eyes found hers for half a second. He nodded. She nodded back, not understanding why her hands were trembling. The delivery truck appeared 47 seconds later, emerging from the shadow of the loading dock like something summoned from nightmare. 3 men spilled out, automatic weapons already raised, muzzle swinging toward Luca's chest like a blade cutting through air. Time did not slow. It fractured. It splintered into 1,000 separate moments happening all at once. Red laser sight appeared on his chest, a bright dot of certain death blooming against the white fabric of his shirt. His men reaching for their weapons, moving in slow motion, always too slow, always too late. The finger squeezing the trigger. The breath being pulled from the world. Nora did not think. Thought was a luxury for people with choices, and she had long ago learned that she had none. She moved. Why? He demanded, his voice like thunder, like the sound of the sky breaking open. Why would you do this? Through the pain, through the morphine fog that was already beginning to creep into her vision, she found the answer: I do not know. You helped my daughter. Sirens approached, the wail growing louder, closer. His men circled them, weapons drawn, scanning for remaining threats. Bruno, she would learn his name later, stepped forward. Boss, we need to move. Police incoming. Luca did not move. His hand stayed pressed against her shoulder, keeping the blood inside where it belonged. We wait, he said. His voice was flat, absolute, the kind of command that would be obeyed without question or hesitation. When the paramedics arrived, when they lifted her onto the stretcher and began assessing the damage with professional efficiency, Luca spoke to them with a certainty that left no room for negotiation: her medical bills. All of them. They come to me. No insurance questions. No payment plan discussions. You understand me? The paramedics exchanged a look that said they understood perfectly. She was being marked, whether she wanted to be or not. Then he was gone, melting back into the darkness with his men, leaving only the echo of his certainty and the weight of her grandmother's recipe book, now spotted with her own blood, pressed against her side. Nora passed out in the ambulance, holding the leather-bound book like it was the only thing keeping her tethered to the world she had known before the bullet changed everything. She woke in a private hospital room at 6:23 in the morning with a shoulder that throbbed like a second heartbeat and no memory of how she had gotten there. The machines beside her bed beeped in steady rhythm. Her arm was immobilized in a sling, wrapped in gauze and medical tape. And sitting in the chair beside her bed, sleeping with her head against the metal rail, was her daughter Emma, 10 years old and small enough that her feet did not touch the ground. Her son Marcus was curled up in the other chair, his stuffed rabbit tucked under his arm, his 6-year-old face peaceful in a way she rarely saw during waking hours. They were safe. They were with her. Everything else could wait. A nurse came in at 6:22 and checked the monitors with practiced efficiency. She was younger than Nora, maybe 24, with kind eyes and the particular exhaustion of someone working a shift that had lasted too long. "How are you feeling?" she asked. "Like I got shot," Nora said, and the nurse smiled despite herself. "Your bill is covered," the nurse said carefully. The gentleman left instructions. "Everything is paid for. You do not need to worry about costs." The gentleman. As if Luca Calabrese was just another wealthy businessman with a conscience. As if he was not the man whose men had killed 2 people in an alley 3 nights ago. As if the world she had entered by stepping between him and a bullet was not a world entirely made of different rules than the one she had left behind. On the table beside her bed sat her grandmother's recipe book, carefully cleaned and wrapped in plastic, and a card with nothing on it but a phone number written in precise, careful handwriting. She was released that afternoon despite the doctor's protests that she needed at least one more night of observation. Nora insisted. Hospital rooms cost money even when someone else was paying. The risk was not worth whatever comfort lying in this bed provided. She took the bus home with Emma holding her good hand and Marcus leaning against her hip, his small face anxious about the bandages and the sling and the fact that his mother had been broken. At 4:17 in the afternoon the next day, there was a knock on her apartment door. She opened it to find 2 men in the hallway, both wearing suits that cost more than her monthly rent, both carrying leather briefcases like armor. The first was tall and thick-shouldered, with dark hair going silver at the temples and eyes that had seen things that could not be unseen. This was Bruno. The second was younger, leaner, with a neck tattoo barely visible above his collar. This was Pietro. "Miss Hartley," Bruno said, and his voice was gentle, which terrified her more than if he had been cruel. "Mr. Calabrese requests a meeting." "I do not want his money," Nora said, stepping back, trying to close the door. Bruno caught it with one hand, not forcefully but with absolute certainty. "He does not offer money. He offers a conversation." They drove her in the back seat of a black SUV, Emma and Marcus staying with the neighbor downstairs, an elderly woman who had been kind enough to pretend not to notice the sounds of eviction notices being taped to doors. Nora wore her second-hand coat and held her grandmother's recipe book like armor, like the only thing protecting her from a world she did not understand. The mansion appeared through the window like something from a dream, all wrought iron gates and marble columns and circular driveway lined with guards in discreet earpieces. The wealth was not just visible, it was weaponized, designed to overwhelm and intimidate and make clear the vast distance between the world she had known and the world she had just entered. Luca waited in a study with floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked all of San Francisco, the city spread below them like something he could gather in his hand if he wanted to. He stood when she entered, a gesture that surprised her so completely that she forgot to breathe. He wore a suit the color of storm clouds, tailored so precisely it might have been painted on. The white shirt beneath it was pristine, nothing like the blood-soaked version from the alley. A gold watch hung heavy on his wrist. Rings of silver caught the light on his right hand. "You saved my life," he said without preamble, without the small talk that normal people use to bridge impossible distances. "I pay my debts." "What do you need?" "Nothing," Nora said. She lifted her chin, drawing every ounce of dignity from the place inside her that had not yet been broken. "I do not want anything from you." "Liar." He moved to the window, his movements graceful despite his size. "You need $125,000 in 6 days or you lose your home. Your foreclosure notice is sitting on your kitchen table right now. I made it my business to know." Her breath caught. "How did you?" "I make it my business to know everything about people who take bullets meant for me." He turned back to face her. "So let us try this again. What do you need?" She hesitated, then something in her broke open and the truth spilled out. "I want to know why you helped us that night. In the storm. My car was broken. We were sitting on the shoulder of the highway. You had no obligation to help a stranger and her children. Why did you do it?" Luca was silent for a long moment, his storm-gray eyes locked on hers, and in that silence she understood that she had asked him a question that cut close to something buried deep. When he spoke, his voice came like a confession, "Because I saw someone fighting for her children with $34 and a dead car. I have built an empire on fear, Miss Hartley. You reminded me what desperation actually looks like." He moved to the window and looked out at the city. "My brother sold our family to our enemies 8 years ago. I had to choose between mercy and survival. I chose survival. I killed him myself." The words landed like stones being dropped one by one into still water. "Since then, I do not help people. I use them, or I eliminate them. But you took a bullet meant for me without knowing my name. Without asking for anything in return." The room felt smaller suddenly, the walls pressing in. "Why would you help me?" Nora's voice came out barely a whisper. "I am nobody." "You are the woman who stepped between me and death," Luca said, turning back to her. "That is not nobody. I have children. I cannot be involved with." She gestured around the mansion, the guards, the world of violence and power that surrounded him like a second skin. "I cannot be involved with this. You are already involved. The men who tried to kill me know you saved me. That makes you a target. There will be others. Men who want to hurt me will think hurting you is a way to do it." Her blood froze. The room spun. "My children are being protected. For if my men are posted outside your building right now, they will stay until the threat is eliminated. They will not interfere in your life. You will not see them. But they will be there." "I did not ask for this," she said, and the anger that had been building underneath the shock finally cracked the surface. "Neither did I." His voice remained steady, unmoved by her fury. "But here we are. This is what has happened. Now we deal with it." His men brought coffee in delicate porcelain cups, and she noticed something that would stay with her, the shock in Bruno's eyes when he watched Luca pour the coffee himself instead of demanding one of them do it. Pietro and Bruno exchanged a look, the kind of look that passed between men who had worked together long enough to communicate in glances and silences. Later, she would learn that Pietro whispered to Bruno, 15 years I have worked for him. Never seen him like this. Luca asked about her life. She told him about Douglas Hale, how he stole tips, forced overtime, threatened her job when she refused his advances. Last month he had cornered her in the storage room, his breath smelling of scotch, his hand on her arm leaving bruises she had hidden beneath long sleeves. "If I report you again," he had said, "I will make sure you never work in this city." Luca's expression did not change, but his hands tightened on his coffee cup until his knuckles went white. She told him about Margaret Harrington, the owner's daughter, 38 years old with a Cartier watch and cruelty hidden behind Botox smiles. Margaret, who ran operations and knew exactly what Douglas did and did not care. Margaret, who had laughed, actually laughed, when Nora asked for her stolen tips back. "Maybe you should work harder, Nora," she had said, and the other servers had pretended not to hear. At that exact moment, 3 blocks away in Margaret's penthouse on the 42nd floor, Douglas Hale was pacing while Margaret poured wine into crystal glasses. The penthouse was all chrome and glass and views of the bay, everything designed to announce that they lived in a world where other people's suffering was merely decoration. "That waitress is asking questions," Douglas said. "About the missing tip pool." Margaret smiled like a predator. "Fire her." "I would, but she saved some mobster's life. It is all over the news. If I fire her now, it looks suspicious." Margaret sipped her wine and considered the problem like it was a crossword puzzle. "Then we accelerate. You have been skimming 2 years. $60,000. I have been covering it in the books. If an audit happens, we both go down." "I know. So we make her look unstable. You plant evidence. I make sure corporate believes it. She becomes the problem, not us." They toasted their conspiracy while somewhere else in the city, Luca made a phone call to men whose only job was to learn everything about the people who had hurt Nora Hartley. Back in the study, when Nora moved to leave, when she said, "I cannot accept your help, I do not want to owe you," Luca stepped in front of the door. "You do not owe me," he said. "I owe you. There is a difference. Then we are even. I saved your life, you saved mine in the storm. We are done." "We are not even close to done, Miss Hartley." His storm-gray eyes burnt with certainty. "We have barely begun." She left in a black SUV while the city lights turned to gold and then to darkness. Bruno drove in silence. In the back seat, Nora held her grandmother's recipe book and wondered what she had started, what doors she had opened by stepping between a bullet and a man she did not know. But in his study, Luca Calabrese made a decision that would bring 50 men to her door in exactly 48 hours. The phone rang at 11:34 that night. His voice came across the line like a confession, like a prayer. "Do not be afraid when they arrive. They come to protect what matters." The sidewalk was empty at 6:47 in the evening except for Nora Hartley standing motionless in the summer rain, her work uniform still clinging to her body, her shoulder wound throbbing beneath the thin fabric. The restaurant doors had closed behind her 5 minutes ago, and she had not moved since. Security had walked her to the curb like she was garbage they were disposing of. Like she was nothing. Her hands hung at her sides, palms open, as if she had been holding something precious and it had slipped through her fingers. The rain fell harder. Above her, the restaurant's neon sign buzzed and flickered, red, then darkness, then red again, casting her face in alternating light and shadow. Inside, through the glass, she could see Douglas Hale standing in the kitchen doorway. Smirking. His arms crossed like a man who had won something. He had won. Margaret Harrington had won. And Nora Hartley had lost everything in the time it took to process a lie so perfectly constructed that the truth did not matter anymore. She touched her work apron pocket. Empty. They had taken her paycheck. $300 she had earned across 7 shifts of double time, of aching legs, of smiling while men like Douglas looked at her like she was a thing to be used. Gone. Pocketed by people who already had so much they did not even need it. The rain fell on her face and she did not wipe it away. She did not move. She did not cry. Her tears had long since learned to stay inside when nothing could wash them away. She walked to the bus stop 2 blocks away, each step heavier than the last. The bench was wet. She sat anyway. There was nowhere else to go. Her apartment was 6 miles north. Her children were with Mrs. Chen, the neighbor who watched them without payment because Nora had explained to her, months ago, that she had no money for childcare. Mrs. Chen had nodded and never brought it up again. Nora counted her money by the light of a dying street lamp. $34. She sorted the bills by denomination like she was solving a puzzle with only one impossible answer. 120. 110. 4 ones. 3 quarters. 9 pennies. $34 to last until when? Until Thursday was tomorrow. Friday was foreclosure day. 5 days. $125,000 and $34 in her pocket. The math was simple and the math was death. Emma needed fever reducer. The bottle had been empty for 2 days. Her son needed new shoes because his old ones had a hole in the sole and the concrete was cold in the mornings when they walked to school. School that would not matter anymore because the apartment would be gone, and then what? Shelters? The street? The voice inside her head, the one that had been getting louder every single day for months, whispered that her children would be better off without a mother who had failed them this completely. Her phone buzzed. 3% battery. A text from a number she did not recognize. You are far stronger than you think. Do not give up. The storm will pass. Elsie? She stared at those words until the screen went dark in her hands. One tiny thing stopped her then. One thing kept her from standing up and walking to the bridge that crossed over the bay, the one where the water was deep and dark and final. One memory, Emma's hand in hers that morning, small and warm, asking with the voice of a child who had learned not to ask for things, "Mama, are we going to be okay?" Nora had lied. "Yes, baby. Yes, we are going to be okay." She could not make that a lie. She stood. Her legs trembled beneath her. She boarded the number 47 bus at 7:12 in the evening. The driver did not look at her. Nobody ever looked at people like her. She sat in the back, near the heater that hummed like an injured animal, and watched the city pass by through rain-streaked windows. What Nora did not know, what she could not have known, was that Luca Calabrese had spent the last 6 hours in his study watching security footage on a screen the size of a wall. He had watched Douglas Hale walk to her locker at 11:30 in the morning. He had watched Hale place $800 in an envelope. He had watched him touch the envelope with both hands, her hands, pressing her fingerprints into the paper through contact she had never made. He had watched the entire operation like it was a ballet choreographed by idiots. And Luca was no longer feeling merciful. The morning came at 6:47 a.m. precisely. Nora was standing in her kitchen boiling water for coffee she could no longer afford when the sound began. Boots. Many boots. In the stairwell. Climbing toward her apartment. Growing louder. Growing closer. She froze, the kettle hanging in her hand. The boot stopped at her door. The knock was not a knock. It was an announcement. A declaration. A judgment being handed down. She opened the door and found the hallway filled with 50 men. 50. She could not even see the far wall. They wore black. All of them. Suits that cost more than everything she owned, shoes polished to mirrors, faces carved from stone. Luca stepped forward through the sea of men like he was parting water. He was taller than she remembered. His eyes were storm gray and burning with something she had never seen before. Certainty. Finality. Absolute certainty that whatever was about to happen had already been decided by the universe itself and he was simply the instrument that would make it real. "Miss Hartley," he said, and his voice was deep and solid like an oath, like something carved into granite, "I told you that I pay my debts. Today, I collect mine." He held out a manila folder. His hands were steady. Everything about him was steady. She reached for the folder and her hand shook so badly the paper crinkled beneath her fingers. Douglas Hale and Margaret Harrington have been stealing from this city for 2 years, Luca continued. From you. From 47 other employees. 48 lives they destroyed for money they did not need. The total amount taken is $360,000. I have the evidence. Every document. Every wire transfer. Every false accounting entry. Every single lie. Nora opened the folder. Pages and pages of bank records. Security footage still showing Hale in her locker, his hands pressing the envelope, his face twisted into satisfaction. Wire transfers to accounts in the Cayman Islands. Falsified tip reports. Everything. All of it. The truth laid out in black and white. How did you? She began, but the words dissolved. I told you, he said simply. I make it my business to know who hurts the people I care about. Bruno stepped forward. He moved like a man delivering a sentence. The FBI is raiding the restaurant now. Federal wire fraud. Embezzlement. Conspiracy to commit theft. Both of them are finished. At 6:58 a.m., Douglas Hale was standing in his kitchen with a cup of coffee turning cold in his hand when the television switched to breaking news. Margaret's voice came through his phone, screaming. He could not understand her words. He was trying to when his front door exploded inward. 12 federal agents in tactical gear, weapons drawn, badges gleaming. He dropped the coffee. The cup shattered against the tile. Douglas Hale, you are under arrest for wire fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy. He was on his knees before he realized his legs had given out. His hands were shaking so badly he could not clasp them together. I want a lawyer. This is a mistake. I did not. We have your offshore accounts, the lead agent said. Her voice was carved from ice. The Caymans. The wire transfers. Everything. Tell it to the judge. They led him out in handcuffs, and the news cameras were waiting on the street. Every channel, all of them, showing a man who had believed himself untouchable being led down his apartment building steps like an animal being led to slaughter. His face was on every screen in the city by 8 a.m. Crying. Begging. Broken. At 7:15, Margaret Harrington was arrested at her restaurant. She had been in her office reviewing inventory when the agents came. She screamed about lawyers. About her father's connections. About the fact that she knew important people who would make this go away. The lead agent listened to the entire tirade with the expression of someone hearing a child's lie. Your father's company is under investigation too, the agent said. He is the one who called us. Margaret's face went white. The color simply drained out of it like someone had pulled a plug somewhere inside her chest. She did not scream anymore. She was silent as they placed the handcuffs on her wrists. Silent as they walked her down the back stairs, past the kitchen, past the staff she had abused for years. She did not see their faces. But they saw hers. One of the servers, a woman named Maria who had worked there for 6 years and gone home crying more nights than she had gone home at peace, spoke loud enough for Margaret to hear as she passed, "Justice is not death. It is watching you lose everything the way you made us lose everything." The handcuffs bit into Margaret's wrists. The Cartier watch that had cost more than a house glinted in the morning sun. She was crying now, mascara running, the woman who had owned the restaurant reduced to a shaking thing being led away. The news covered it for 72 hours straight. 47 counts of federal wire fraud. 47 lives. 47 counts of embezzlement. Douglas Hale, 40 years in federal prison. Margaret Harrington, 35 years. No bail. No plea deals. No mercy. The restaurant closed permanently. All assets seized by the government to repay victims. Every news outlet in the city ran the story. Some ran it nationally. By evening, it was trending on every platform Nora did not use because she could not afford internet. What she did not know was that Luca had insured something else. Each of the 47 employees received their stolen tips returned to them, not just the original amounts, but doubled, tripled, with interest calculated by men who knew mathematics and vengeance. Anonymous transfer. No way to trace it. No way to thank him. Nora received $27,000 in an account that opened in her name. She discovered it at 1 in the afternoon when she sat at a library computer to look for jobs she would never get now, with a reputation destroyed, with a police record pending because the plants were still growing in the soil even though the gardeners had been arrested. $27,000. She stared at the screen until her eyes blurred. The apartment. Emma's medicine. Her son's shoes. 3 months of breathing room instead of drowning. She put her head down on the keyboard and did not know how to feel. Relief and terror and gratitude and a love so overwhelming for a man she barely knew that it frightened her. Her phone rang. His voice came across the line like a confession, like prayer being spoken by someone who had never prayed before. Nora. It is done. You are free now. All of you. She could not speak. Do not be afraid, he continued, and in those words was every promise she had ever needed and never believed would come true. You are far stronger than you think. The storm has passed. The sky is clearing. I promise you that. She whispered, thank you. No, he said softly. Thank you. The library computer hummed beneath her fingertips as Nora Hartley stared at the screen, her hands trembling so violently she could barely read the numbers displayed in the account that had materialized in her name. $27,000. Not a fortune, but the difference between drowning and breathing, between losing her children to the system and keeping them safe for 3 more months while she figured out how to survive the next year, and the year after that. She looked around the empty public library at 2 in the afternoon, aware of how conspicuous she was, a woman in a waitress uniform with the smell of grease still clinging to her hair, wearing shoes held together with duct tape and prayer. The money had appeared without explanation. An electronic transfer from an account with no name, no routing number she could trace, no way to understand why someone had chosen her. She knew. Of course she knew. But knowing and admitting were different things, and admitting meant accepting help from a man whose world operated on rules she did not understand, in a language spoken in the spaces between words. Her phone, a cracked Samsung older than her daughter, buzzed against the table. The message came from an unknown number, a lawyer's address and a time. Tomorrow, 10 a.m. Bring documentation of the foreclosure notice. Someone was coming to fight the bank for her. Nora closed her eyes and felt something crack open inside her chest, something that had been sealed shut since the morning she counted $17.42 and realized it had to last until Friday. The apartment. Emma's inhaler. Her son's winter coat. 3 months without the suffocating pressure of eviction notices printed in legal language designed to make her feel like a failure. She did not cry. Her tears had dried up somewhere on a Greyhound bus 3 years ago. Instead, she printed the account confirmation with shaking hands, folded it 3 times, and held it against her heart like a prayer from someone who had stopped believing in prayer. By evening, she stood in her apartment, the 1-bedroom with water stains on the ceiling and a radiator that clanked all night like something dying, and tried to imagine living here without the countdown. Without the foreclosure notice sitting on her kitchen table like a clock ticking toward the end of everything. The apartment was small enough that she could stand in the center and see every room, the bedroom where Emma and her son slept on a mattress on the floor, the kitchen with cabinets that held 3 cans of beans and a box of crackers, the living room where she worked on her grandmother's recipe book at night, copying the handwritten recipes by lamplight, trying to preserve something of the woman she had never met. The knock came at 6:43 p.m. She knew before she opened the door. Some part of her had been expecting him, the way prey recognizes the presence of a predator long before seeing its shape in the dark. Luca stood in her doorway wearing a charcoal suit that probably cost more than her monthly rent, his cashmere coat draped across his shoulders like something he had pulled from the sky. Behind him, the hallway was empty. No guards. No men in black. Just him, holding something wrapped in brown paper. "You left this at the hospital," he said, extending the package. His voice was different than she remembered from the storm, quieter now, careful, like someone learning to speak after years of silence. Her hand shook as she took it. The paper fell away to reveal her grandmother's recipe book, the one with notes scrawled in margins, the one she had clutched during the surgery that almost cost her everything. She had not even realized she had left it behind, so consumed by fear and gratitude and the impossible weight of needing this man's help. "Thank you," she whispered. "For everything. I do not know how to." "You do not have to thank me," he said. His eyes were gray, like the sky before a storm, and they held something new, something that looked almost like shame. "You saved my life. I settled my debt." She swallowed. "The lawyer. The restitution timing. The money in my account. That was you." It was not a question. He did not deny it. "The bank will restructure the foreclosure," he continued. 40-year mortgage instead of 15. Your payments drop to $800 a month. It is already arranged. You will not lose your home, Nora. Your children will not lose their home. She felt her knees weaken. $800 a month. Impossible money that had suddenly become possible. "How did you?" "I have lawyers who negotiate with people who listen to fear." He paused. "You would have found another way. You are far stronger than you think." The apartment was so quiet she could hear the radiator clicking as it cooled, the sound of her own breathing, the sound of her son watching cartoons on Emma's phone in the bedroom, saving battery by keeping the volume low. Sounds of survival. Sounds of scraping by. "Why?" she asked again. The word escaped her before she could stop it. "Why would you do all of this? The money, the lawyers, the restitution fund. Why?" Luca turned slightly, looking at the tiny living room with its second-hand furniture and clothes folded in the corner because there was no dresser. He was looking at the evidence of her poverty the way someone might examine a wound. "Because you reminded me of something I had forgotten," he said slowly. "My brother taught me that mercy is weakness. That compassion is a liability you cannot afford in my world. But he was wrong. You showed me that the night you stood in front of a bullet meant for a stranger." His jaw tightened. "I have built an empire on fear. On the belief that strength means the absence of mercy. But you, a woman with $34 in her pocket, a foreclosure notice, and 2 children depending on her to survive, you showed mercy to me. Real mercy. Not strategic mercy. Not mercy with an angle. Just mercy, because you could not do anything else." She could not speak. "Strength and mercy are not opposites, Nora Hartley. My brother taught me they were. You taught me I was wrong." He moved toward the door. "I am going back to my world. It will take time to dismantle what I have built on fear. It will take longer to rebuild it on something else. But I will do it. Because you reminded me that I could." "Luca, wait," she called out, and something in her voice made him pause with his hand on the door frame. "What happens now? To us? Will I see you again?" He stood in the doorway for a long moment, looking at her, really looking at her, not as a problem to solve or a debt to settle, but as a woman who had shown him something he had believed was impossible. "I do not know if you should," he said finally. "My world is not safe for you. Not yet. Maybe not ever." He pulled the door open. "But I will spend the next year proving that it could be. If you will let me." The door closed. She heard his footsteps in the hallway, the elevator doors sliding open with a hydraulic sigh, the descent of machinery carrying him back down into the city. She stood alone in her apartment, holding her grandmother's recipe book, and realized that the storm had passed. The sky was clearing. And she was far stronger than she had ever believed possible. 1 year later, Nora Hartley stood on the balcony of her own penthouse office overlooking San Francisco, and the woman looking back at her in the floor-to-ceiling windows was unrecognizable. This woman wore a business suit tailored to her frame. This woman had invested the $27,000 into her grandmother's recipes, opening a small restaurant in the Mission District that became 3 restaurants in 3 years. This woman had Emma in private school, healthy and thriving at age 12, with lungs that no longer fought for air. This woman had her son in 2nd grade, reading at a level 2 grades above his age. The woman in the windows was successful. Free. Strong. At 6:13 p.m., exactly 1 year after Luca had left her apartment with the deed to her building in his hands, there was a knock on her office door. He looked older. Quieter. Like someone who had been at war with himself and was only just learning to lay down weapons. Luca Calabrese stood in her doorway wearing an open-collared shirt, no tie, and for the first time she wondered if this was the real version of him, the one who existed when no one was watching, when there was no empire to project, no fear to maintain. "I needed to tell you something," he said. "I have carried it for a year." She waited. "You took a bullet for me," he continued, stepping onto the balcony beside her. "A stranger. You did not know my name. You did not ask what you would receive in return. You just acted." He looked out at the city glittering below them, at the lights beginning to ignite as evening fell. "I realized that everything I believed about strength was wrong. My brother betrayed me, and I thought that meant mercy was weakness. But you taught me different. You showed me that mercy and strength are not opposites. They are the same thing." She turned to him. "We are even, Luca. You saved my children. You gave me a chance." "We will never be even," he said softly. "You saved my life. I just gave you what you already earned." He handed her an envelope. Inside was a deed bearing her name. "The apartment building. It is yours. The tenants stay at current rent, but you own it. You never have to worry about a roof again." She opened it, staring at the document, and felt something settle inside her chest, not relief exactly, but something deeper. Security. Real security. The kind that was not borrowed or conditional, but earned and owned and permanent. "Will I see you again?" she asked. He turned, and for the first time she saw him smile, small, real, almost shy. "I hope so. If you will let me earn it." When he was gone, when she stood alone on her balcony holding the deed to her own building, Nora Hartley understood what he had been trying to tell her that night in the storm. The storm will pass. You are far stronger than you think. And sometimes the person you save might just save you right back. If this story moved your heart, if you believe in second chances and redemption and the strength hidden inside ordinary people, drop a like and subscribe. Share this with someone who needs to hear that the storm will always pass. Remember what Nora learned: you are far stronger than you think. We will see you in the next story.